because everybody from various perspective come here to talk about memasak. So let me remind you, in this webinar, for the first time, you have to keep your microphone unmute, and you can open your microphone in the question and answer session in the end of the presentation. So I know you're looking forward to listen Mr. Johannes' presentation, but first of all, we have an opening remark from our beloved leader and from Ms. Sasri Sunarti. Please, Ms. Sasri Sunarti, the time is yours.
Baik, terima kasih Ferdi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. First of all, I would like to say welcome to you to Johan. Selamat datang di BRIN. Johan adalah seorang peneliti antropologi dari Utrecht University yang pada beberapa bulan yang lalu di awal tahun kita mencoba membantunya untuk melakukan riset lapangan di Mamasa, Sulawesi Barat, dan setelah dia melakukan penelitian lapangannya, ini semacam etik atau semacam pertanggungjawaban moral sebagai seorang akademisi untuk berbagi pengalaman, sharing hasil kajian lapangannya di Mamasa. So, pagi ini kita akan mendengarkan semacam sharing knowledge dari lapangan yang dilakukan oleh Johannes terkait risetnya di Mamasa. Dan barangkali juga nanti kita akan menumbuhkan suatu diskusi bersama. Dan pagi ini, Johan, you look not very researcher here, but some of them join with us from Zoom. And Pak Heri, as the head of research organization, say hello to you, and sorry that he is not cannot join with us today. Dan selamat mendengarkan public lecture yang akan disampaikan oleh Johan. Dan dari data yang kami peroleh, beberapa dari diskusinya itu bisa memantik tentang isu language preservation based on community di Mamasa. Jadi selamat mendengarkan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi semuanya.
Thank you, Bu Sasri. Now, let me start our main session. We are honored today because we have a speaker that will share his insight that will certainly enrich our understanding, maybe start some new idea, and maybe we have open some collaboration change, okay? And here I read some of his CV for you. His name is Johannes Lagerwich. I spelled it correct. Okay. And he was born in 11 July 2001. You can contact him in Johannes Lagerwich at life.nl. Well, his academic background, graduate from Bachelor of Art, isn't it? Yeah, Bachelor of Art from International Studies of Leiden University, and his master, graduate from Cultural Anthropology in Utrecht, Netherlands. Well, his experience including fundraising from 2019 in various NGO, and in February 2004, he is academic consultant in UNESCO Netherlands Commission. Okay. without further ado, I present you Johannes Lagerwage. The floor is yours.
Okay, just before we begin, should I? Slight different height. Before we begin, we have maybe a signal because I don't have access to the PowerPoint right now. So maybe should I like tap my finger or something like this? Okay, thank you very much. Selamat pagi semuanya. Good morning. Terima kasih banyak sudah menyambut saya di Pusat Riset BRIN. Merupakan suatu kehormatan bisa hadir di sini hari ini. I've been informed that there are some people here today that might have some trouble understanding English. And when I was discussing this with Ibu Fakriati and Ibu Sastri, we discussed the idea of maybe me doing part of the lecture in Indonesian. But while I was practicing, I also realized that I'm really not doing you any favors by really trying this. But luckily, I did make this PowerPoint entirely in Indonesian. And I think most of the information that you are looking for will be there. So if you don't understand me, please feel free to look at the slides and we can always talk about it after. So as I was thank you again for presenting me or introducing me, of course. And like I said, my name is Johannes Lagerwij. I'm 24 years old and I'm from the Netherlands. And very young. And over the past year, I indeed studied international studies at Leiden University and cultural anthropology at Utrecht University. And I recently completed my master's degree where I specialize in sustainable citizenship. And this is a field that looks at how people and communities balance social, economic, and environmental responsibilities in building a more sustainable future. Next slide, please. Okay. And cultural anthropology, as many of you may know, is the science of people, societies, and cultures. The sustainable citizenship aspect of this master's mostly describes the responsibilities and actions of individuals and communities who live in awareness of their impact on the planet, society, and future generations. So it blends the idea of citizenship and the right duties to participate in society with sustainability and meeting present needs without compromising the future. Now, in my master's, I learned that sustainability does not only entail environmental concerns, rather it was nuanced about the balance between social, economic, and environmental components that each contributed as a separate pillar to build a more holistic conceptualization. And this has been, while the triangle, here I have, please continue. So here on the screen, you'll see the triangle of sustainability, making up these three aspects. Can I perhaps have the other microphone so I can... And while this triangle might not look too familiar to people, this has been actively used by the United Nations since the Rio Summit in 1992. Because at the end of the day, it's very important to realize that maybe even when you do complete and when you do succeed in creating environmental responsibility, it will not last unless it's also economically viable and reflects the needs of the communities that need it and that will be affected by it. And when I learned about this, it reminded me much about my own bachelor's thesis, where I was researching the failures of the United States civilian mission in Afghanistan and how much of it could be contributed to the flawed development missions and that might support economic sustainability, but eventually at the end failed to uphold the social aspects of this triangle. And the desire for self-determination at the end was failed to really be met by the US officials in Afghanistan. Next slide, please. So when I was tasked during my master's to develop my own research project, looking at this triangle, thinking back at what I had learned during my bachelor's, I thought to myself, I want to learn more about the intermediary actors. Now, this is, of course, a very ambiguous term, but what I really mean by it is those people in local communities or smaller NGOs that really stand between large government entities, large institutions, powerful institutions, whether national or international, and the local communities that are affected by the changes brought by these large outside powers. And I wanted to see how they balance those expectations. Some things do not align, how they will deal with this. So I wondered, how do these people assure that the outside influence aligns with the local realities and uphold their rights to self-determination and cultural conservation? And so I did some research, and this is where you truly learn that. And we've seen this in recent decades, especially also coming from current politics, that a lot of NGOs are getting a lot less support nowadays because these flawed policy implementations. And I think that, sometimes in some sectors they are afraid that it will lead to a generation in which NGO work will decrease to have an absence in how we live together in this world. But I think that doesn't have to be the case. I think it's very important that into how we can strengthen the roles of people, or look into the roles of people. How can we make sure that we can fix the things that need to be changed? So when I was doing some research and reaching out to some people, actually sent an email to Dr. Interwan, who among his people who know him might better know as Pak Didi. And he's a trained ecologist in conservation biology here in Jakarta, who has more than 3 decades of field experience. And when I sent Pak Didi an email, he seemed to be interested in some of the things I was writing about, and I think we share some of the same interests. So under his guidance and with further support from Bu Sastri and Bu Fakriati here at BRIN, I developed a research project that eventually, on the 21st of February of this year, landed me in the Mamasa Regency in West Sulawesi, right here in Indonesia. So this was only 5 months ago, and before I went there, I had never been to Indonesia before. Next slide, please, by the way. I had never been to Indonesia before, and as anthropologists, we are often asked to write about our positionality. Who are we, and how will that affect the interactions that we have with the local populations that we are meant to study, because that will eventually really shape our research. So thinking about that really started me off with a big question, because, given our history, how will you be as a Dutch person in Indonesia? Because of course in the Netherlands we still like to make jokes of the Germans, and I will not go into it too much. But I was of course afraid that, what if maybe I'm treated with hostility. Luckily this was not the case, because soon after I arrived in Mamasa, I learned that treating a stranger with hostility is not really in the nature of the Indonesian people. And I actually felt very much at home in only a matter of days. The warmth and kindness that I experienced here is, thank you very much. We love you too. But the warmth and kindness that I've experienced with Indonesians is something that I have never experienced in my entire life. I've been to a bunch of different countries that are quite known for apparently being nice, but they often act nice, but you don't really know what's behind it. And here you see that there's a genuine love for each other, for society, and trying to be a pleasant part of each other's lives. And this is something I've never seen in that scale. People really put the emphasis on each other rather than themselves, and that's something that I'm not really known, that I've not really seen in the Netherlands to the same degree. So you saw this when I was walking down a street in Mamasa, And sometimes I would just be greeted by these strangers who would just talk to me and just yell, "Hello, Garimana." And I would often just respond like "Jalan Jalan." And I just thought to myself, if you walk down the street in the Netherlands and you just yell to a stranger, "Hey, where are you going?" People will just look at you and think, what do you want from me, you know? And this is none of your business, exactly. And this is something that I saw in other parts of Indonesia as well. I spent some time in Bali. And in Bali, it was quite the same. Only there, people would say, "Hello, where are you going?" Because everyone in Bali speaks very good English, which I unfortunately cannot say about people in Mamasa, but it's very understandable. Yes. So in addition to the general kindness of people in Indonesia, being Dutch in the Mamasa region specifically was heartwarming for another reason. Because when people ask me "Dari mana" and I said "Saya dari Belanda," people would often start listing a couple of names, starting with Patrick Kluivert. I'm very surprised with how much people here love Patrick Kluivert. I mean, people back home know him, but you know, it's just Patrick Kluivert at the end of the day. But to my surprise, they also started listing a couple of names of people I wasn't familiar with: Haarsma, Van der Klees, and De Vries. And apparently, these were missionaries who came to Mamasa and converted a large part of the population to Christianity. So that was quite interesting because, you know, of course, since my own country and family has some Christian heritage, although I did not emphasize it, we don't really practice it as much anymore. We do celebrate a lot of the same traditions as people in Mamasa, such as Christmas and Easter. And so, you know, it was very heartwarming that when I wasn't home for Easter, which I usually spend with my family, I was able to participate in this walk with a lot of people here. I got out of bed at 4 a.m. I heard people singing, and I walked outside and I walked with them holding torches, and it was actually quite lovely. So yeah, and it really allowed me to see, demise the barrier between our cultures, and I was treated as more as a foreigner. But of course, there was sometimes, yeah, maybe it's just yeah. Of course, there were also differences that sometimes were challenging, such as the rhythm of daily life that was quite different, and the way people related to each other quite different. That I struggled with most significantly, it was, of course, the language. It's undeniable. Even though you want to connect, there's still a lot of people there, or just a lot of people there who don't share a common language with me, or I don't share a common language with them. So I wasn't really able to communicate with them as directly. So I often used, or I mostly interacted with people who did speak some English, or I relied on some type of translation, either via, technology or some other people. But there was this one particular moment where I was at some family's house, and it was a relatively wealthy family in the Regency, and I was sitting in a room full of men who didn't speak a word of English, and suddenly a little girl came out who was 4 years old, and it was quite strange because usually when I was in Mamasa and children saw me, they would just scream "Bule, bule," exactly, and that would often mean that, you know, like they were quite nervous around me. But this girl sat down right next to me, and she started speaking to me in fluent English. And it was actually quite strange because you're in a room full of people who don't speak that you're able to speak. And the only person you can have a conversation with is a 4-year-old. It's a 4-year-old, you know? And of course, it's a 4-year-old, so you mostly talk about drawings and what kind of games she liked to play, and rainbows and clouds and all of that. But it was still quite fascinating. And I remember that her parents told me that they really tried to expose her to as much English as possible, so that she would have a lot of opportunities to move abroad eventually, or maybe study internationally, or just find herself a good job in an international environment, really expand her options. But they also told me that she was struggling with the local Mamaka language. Next slide, please. So, I was quite taken aback by this because so far most people I had interacted with still spoke the Mamasa language, especially the older generation, and especially among the general public. But it was what I noticed, especially among youth that had ambitions to maybe leave the regency or more upper class people in society, that the culture was not celebrated to the same degree, or at least the language wasn't spoken, and it was quite interesting to me. And what I was saying is I started noticing this pattern, and then eventually I started to think of this hypothesis. Next slide, which is nothing new, but that there was an evident link between the cultural loss I saw in Mamasa and economic ambition. Next slide, please. So there's this quote that I really think about a lot, and that is, history does not repeat itself, but it often repeats. And of course, what this means is that when something happens in society or when something happens in history, it's usually not replicated in the exact same way. But the patterns in our human behavior and our human nature often result into things unfolding quite similarly, even across cultures, even across the world. And even though Netherlands is a very, very different country from Indonesia in a lot of aspects, economic ambition seemingly being tied to internationalization, or especially linguistic internationalization and nationalization, rather than focusing on the community, with the effect that some things might not entirely work out culturally, is something I noticed at home too. Because, well, I'm from the Netherlands, and in a lot of languages, the Netherlands is also called Holland. I know in Indonesia it's called Belanda. But if I ask you the question, what exactly is Belanda, that is quite a difficult question to answer, because even though in Indonesia it generally refers to the entire country, a better translation for the Netherlands specifically will be Tanah Renda, I think. I'd have to check that, of course. But the thing is, Holland, which of course Belanda comes from, is actually this region in the western part of the country. And it's divided between North and South Holland. Now, this has historically always been the economic and political powerhouse of the country. In high school, I actually had a history teacher who was from Amsterdam. And in the bigger cities, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, they're all in that part of the country. She once told me that, the reason why we as a nation were doing as well in the 17th century is because of the economic influence and the actions of the people out west. And she told me that with a lot of pride, but I'm very proud to say that as someone who is not from that region, that she was true. Because it wasn't always positive, of course. I'm actually from the north of the Netherlands. It's the average income in the north of the Netherlands is slightly lower than in the west of the country. It's primarily agrarian. There's one large city, but it's primarily agrarian. And the native language of many of the people there is not Bahasa Belanda, as spoken in the west of the country. It's actually a dialect of Low German, which is what most of my ancestors, my parents, spoke as well. But that is also changing quite fast, because my mother, she was the first of her family to go to university, and they thought it might be a good idea to move into the city, also because there were more job opportunities for them as university graduates, but also it might be a better environment for me and my sisters to grow up. But the thing is, we grew up in an environment that did not speak the local dialect. We mostly spoke Spanish or Dutch at home. Which was also very much, how do you say this? Which was enforced. It was preferred and also high in academic and higher socio economic environments where many of my family who lived in the countryside still spoke the local dialect. And I understood that there was a difference, but it was also quite odd to me because as someone who is from the north, as someone who is from this part of the country, it's also important to stay close to my roots. Ulu, exactly. But you know, sometimes my grandparents would speak it to each other, but they would speak standard Dutch to me. And I would sometimes try to practice it with them. But my grandmother always told me, don't do it. You speak such beautiful Dutch. Don't do it. And it was when I was younger, I didn't understand this, but now I know it was tied to the fact that if I wanted to have a good career, if I wanted to have a good job and be taken seriously in higher socioeconomic environments, then it's better for you not to speak a local dialect or have a strong local accent. And so while it's very different from what's in Mamasa, even in a country like the Netherlands, you can see that, and this is something that happens all across the world, where certain dialects, accents are not as encouraged in academic settings, urban settings, higher socioeconomic settings. So let me just try it. So with the numbers, let's see. So now what you can see is that it just thank you. Oh, I think this works. Okay, so this pattern is not something new. It's been captured and discussed within academic circles many times, especially in sociolinguistics. There are different ways to discuss it from a sociological and anthropological perspective. Now, what I observed in Mamasa, the erosion of a local language among younger generation, is what Fishman describes as the fatality of a language and how it depends on whether it is carried across generations and tied to institutions of everyday life, such as school, governance, and the media. Fishman argues that without that institutional anchoring, language will inevitably lose ground. And another lens provided is by Pierre Bourdieu, who might be a bit more familiar to some of you, who states that the fatality of a language also largely depends on it's not just a tool, it's not just a tool for communication, but also a resource in the marketplace. So some carry prestige, opportunity, and recognition, while others do not. So how we can link this to what we discussed before, while standard Dutch might carry opportunity, prestige, and recognition, Low German does not. And while Bahasa Indonesia does carry some prestige, opportunity, and recognition, Bahasa Mamasa does not. So while this might not immediately threaten the Dutch language or Bahasa Indonesia, as we all know, the nation states that we live in do not perfectly represent the diversity of cultures we have around the world. We have thousands of cultures around the world, thousands of languages around the world, but we only have around 200 countries. So it does affect a lot of Dutch people, and it does affect a lot of Indonesian people and their cultures. So when a language is disconnected from education, jobs, or social mobility, it is devalued, and over time, people adapt to this hierarchy, even if it means abandoning their mother tongue. Now, there's one last academic perspective I want to share with you, presented by Michel Foucault, who helps us see that bigger picture. Because for him, power is always tied to knowledge. Institutions decide which forms of knowledge, which ways of speaking, which cultural practices are legitimate, and which are not. So, in other words, the decline of a language or tradition is not simply the result of natural change, but of power structures that privilege some forms of expression while pushing others into invisibility. And this logic extends beyond language, as the same mechanism can be applied to various cultural practices and culture more broadly. And when practices, traditions, or identities are not linked to this opportunity, the recognition or institutional support, that's when they become most vulnerable. And people may let them go not because they want to, but because they want to pursue something. And it's better to let go of elements that appear to carry less value. So just to move on to the next slide. The problem statement, what it really comes down to when I did my research was that in Mamasa specifically, local language and cultural practices are increasingly eroded, not because people reject them, but because they lack status, institutional support, and connection to opportunity. Because simultaneously, on the other hand, these cultures are best preserved, but in environments where modernization and economic opportunities are the least viable. So what you then end up with, what a lot of people recognize, is that this is a story that is often framed as tradition versus modernity. On the one hand, you have the tradition of upholding your identity and your culture, but if you want to participate in a larger economic setting, then that's something that you're going to have to leave behind to a certain extent. But as Michel Foucault powerfully describes, this does not necessarily have to be the case. So to move on to the next slide, what I wanted to research when I came to Mamasa was the following. How did the people in Mamasa negotiate this modernization? And what does it reveal about their the continuity of their lifeways? So, please go on. So I researched this in the following way. I spent 10 weeks, or in a 7-week period within a 10-week span, I traveled to Mamasa and I lived there with some families, conducting ethnographic research. And when I was there, I attended ceremonies, joined community events, and carried interviews and surveys with elders, youth activists, priests, and local leaders. And while I was there, my aim was not to observe, but to understand people how themselves and see how they change and how they adapt to change in particular. So I applied 3 different research methods. Please go on to the next slide. Within ethnographic research, there are a number of ways to go about this. Observatie participant, participant observation, informal conversation, and semi-structured interviews. Now let me start with the first one. Participant observation really entails that you participate in daily events and you in daily activities of the community to understand their behavior and practice in a more meaningful way. So you, for example, attend funerals, you attend wedding events, but you also go to church. But it's also as simple as socializing, and this might seem a bit ridiculous, but it's a very legitimate scientific method, karaoke with some people there. And it teaches you a lot. And of course, this was a picture taken during a local engagement party. But while after a certain amount of weeks, I got accustomed to my environment, Mamasa is not a particularly touristy area, so they don't have a lot of foreigners, especially foreigners from very far away that might look a little differently. So while I might had grown accustomed to my environment quite quickly, my environment had not really grown accustomed to me that easily. And what you end up with is a lot of people that really are very surprised to see you. And then maybe you go to one place for some participant observation exercises and go to another, and then you see yourself on Facebook on someone else's phone, which was quite interesting. And then of course there were informal conversations I had with people, either directly or with the use of some translation. I sometimes use my phone for that, but there were also a lot of people that really helped me out with that. And then there were semi-structured interviews. So I have a list of questions I want to go over, but overall it's a very liberal conversation. You can hand it into different directions and open to go, yeah. So there were 3 research locations within Mamasa that I really focused on, and this really balanced the more urban, more modernized part of the Regency and the more agrarian part. So, of course, the most well-known town in Mamasa is Kota Mamasa, Mamasa City, and it's a semi-urban center of the region. And it represents the more modernized and vibrant environments. There are a couple of supermarkets, like, when you go in, you see the Alpha Mart, and right next to the Indo Mart, as you have in Indonesia a lot, one of the most significant rivalries within within the area. And then, of course, I spent a lot of time in Bala Satanatian, the Bala district, which is a mountainous and largely rural village, an area of the south of the city, and it serves as the administrative center of local NGO that I will talk about a bit more later. And this location was important for observing deeply rooted ritual practice and customary authority. And then there was Tondok Bokaru, in the picture of the middle there, which was an absolutely stunning, a socially significant town just north of Mamasa City. And it provided me with a lot of insights into community life and the spiritual foundations of adat knowledge. Yes, and like I said, these sites were deliberately chosen to capture a diverse range of socio-political settings, from modernized urban life to remote rural communities with strong ritual traditions. And this multi-sided approach allowed me to compare how modernization and cultural continuity played out across different contexts. So there were 3 different ways I aimed to answer this research question. And because from my fieldwork, I noticed that negotiation of modernity in Mamasa is shaped above all by 3 factors. Firstly, religion, the blending of Christianity with ancestral beliefs and rituals. Social class and generational authority, or the ways youth and elders contest legitimacy and cultural authority. And modern technology, especially the use of digital media among young people, how it's used to preserve, reinterpret, and perform various traditions. So now to get into the body of the thesis, if you go to the next slide. Let's start off with religion. Like I talked about earlier, religion did play a significant part in local life in Mamasa. Every time I went to a new place, people would often ask me, one of the first questions they asked me is, what religion are you? The thing is, I was actually raised agnostic by my parents, but that was not always, I think, appreciated as much. So, but my parents were both baptized. So I also said my mom is Catholic and my father is Protestant. And sometimes they would ask me, what are you? And I just told them I celebrate Christmas. But yeah, even though Christianity had become the more dominant religion in the Regency over 100 years ago, they often call it the modern religion, because just over 100 years ago, the more dominant religion was actually an ancestral religion known as Aluk. And Aluk was much more than a religion, as of course most religions are, but it was a way of life, and it provided a moral order, rules of inheritance and kinship, and rituals to maintain harmony between people, the land and the spirit world. And its most important ceremonies was the Rambu Solo, very familiar and I think very well-known funeral ceremony in Mamasa, in which I think the body is preserved for a while. It takes a very long time, and a lot of animal sacrifices are made. It's a way to not only guide the soul of the deceased into the afterlife, but also a way to honor the ancestors and reaffirm the ties between the past, the present, and the future. This was a lot of this research was also conducted by Kees Buys. If you're interested, it's a Dutch anthropologist who visited the Regency back in the 70s and 80s. But at funerals today, given that the cosmological changes, the religious changes in society, you witness a lot of Christian prayers spoken alongside of the animal sacrifices. So you see kind of a hybridization of these different cosmological religious backgrounds. And for some, the meaning of these sacrifices have changed and they reinterpret it differently, more as part of Christianity. But there continued to be a presence that shows how the ancestral way of thinking about religion and afterlife still quietly shaped Mamasa's spirituality. And the coexistence of these two might seem like a harmonious blending, and for a lot of people, it truly is. But there are some underlying difficulties, especially within the church, among church leaders and pastors. There's a lot of negotiation about how to actually integrate the ancestral religion into Christianity, and there's a lot of ambiguity about this. And I think a lot of this also has to do with the institutional weight of Christianity that it brings to the table, in comparison to the aluk, which is primarily preserved very informally by the people itself. Now, going on to the next slide, social class and authority. So within the aluk world, traditionally authority was rested with community elders, some older people who embodied ritual knowledge and customary law. But the role of elders has weakened in recent years, not due to only the religious changes, but also due to other reasons, such as political influence, other formal jobs and education. Young people in particular are moving away from the moral world of Adat towards the logic that the state and the church provides. And this does create a fragile situation because the ritual knowledge of the elders is not being transmitted as it was before. And as cultural leaders, this is a side effect of their decrease in influence. And without young people, learning from them, much of this knowledge is at risk of disappearing in Mamasa. And as Bourdieu also reminded us, when forms of cultural capital are not institutionally recognized, then they do lose value. And in Mamasa today, the cultural leadership role of these community elders is no longer legitimized by schools or the state or even the church. And that does create some problems. And the third way I analyzed this was with modern technology. Now, it's actually, and maybe this is actually maybe a bit wrong of me to assume, but I went into very culturally rich agrarian villages very far away from the larger cities. And you see people wearing traditional clothes and living in all these traditional houses, but everyone, of course, does have smartphones. Everyone's on social media. So it has opened up a whole new world to people in the area, and it has opened up new opportunities and enabled people to share their culture online, and which can, of course, be very powerful, and it's also recognized by a lot of people there as a way to preserve it. The problem is that young people who might record these rituals, who share songs or post dances on TikTok or Instagram, for example, do not create an imbalance in how and the meaning behind or the context in which they are preserved, as these digital forms are often fragments and they're a bit stripped from the depth and context from actual lived practice. And while a TikTok video may reach thousands, it cannot replace sitting with an elder and learning the meaning of a song and ritual as it was meant to be. And instead of ensuring the preservation, what you end up with is an acceleration of more service level engagement with a culture where heritage is performed, but not fully transmitted or lived by its its apprentices. And without spaces where people can study and practice these traditions seriously, the knowledge risks being reduced to entertainment rather than lived heritage. And that's, of course, for a lot of people quite problematic. So to really bring it all together, so across religion, social authority, and technology, we see the same trend. And that's that tradition continue, but in increasingly fragile forms. And they are upheld informally, but not supported by institutions institutions, and this does create a risk that without deliberate effort, Mamasa's cultural heritage could erode further with each generation. So when you think about what could be done, also returning to what Foucault shared with us earlier, is that the institutionalization and embedding language, I think, yeah, embedding language and cultural practices into formal structures such as educational platforms, media, and public policy is among the most powerful mechanisms for ensuring their survival and fertility. Because without belonging to established institutions and receiving official support, cultural traditions and languages risk fading from collective memory. So there's a reason why institutions matter so much, and this can be summarized down to formal recognition and legitimacy. So when governments and institutions grant language official status, such as inclusion of constitutions, policy, mandates, or even through academic curriculums, it gains critical legitimacy, and this is not only elevates its prestige and its status, but also powers allocation for funding, for infrastructure and teacher training. So I'll run by the other ones quite briefly. The integration to daily life through education and media, so institutionalizing schools, broadcasting, publishing, also allows for more formal exposure across generations and contexts. And so the consistent use in education and public media will transform a language into less of a heritage and more of a living mode of communication. And lastly, community empowerment and generational continuity. So institutional support signals to communities that their identity matters. It's something that the collective is something that something that when people organize and actively talk about, it's something that we value and recognize as something that we need to care about. And this recognition does foster some pride, and it does encourage people to continue to use it. And this does strengthen cultural resilience, and especially among the younger generation, it's very important. And this is something that has been witnessed across the world with these types of policies and these types of changes. For example, I've brought with me 3 examples of this. One of them is in Basque, in northern Spain. So back in 1991, only about a quarter of Basque people could speak their language fluently. But by 2001, well, this was still but in 2011, this had climbed to 27%. And in 2021, 36%. So, and this has to do with the fact that a lot more media was offered in Spain, and a lot of media was offered in the local language. And even in institutional support, so through schools, it became more present. And this is also seen in, for example, Maori, where a lot of media in Hawaii and Maui, where a lot more media and institutional support is given to these languages, where classes are offered in schools in these languages, and news can be received in these languages. So this brings us to, in the Indonesian context, this also brings us to AMAN, Aliansi Masyarakat Adat Nusantara. This is a nationwide Indonesian nonprofit organization that advocates for adat rights, cultural preservation, and self-determination. It was established in the 1980s as a response to the negative effects of state-led developments and large-scale investment projects, even from abroad, that threatened local communities, especially in the outer islands of Indonesia. And today, AMAN represents over 17 million people across more than 2,000 adat communities. So the things that adat mostly focus on is defending adat people's land rights and legal recognition, preserving cultural and ritual knowledge, promoting cultural education and youth engagement, and supporting economic and ecological sustainability in adat territories. And as an adat community, AMAN is also present in Mamasa, where I studied, and in Mamasa, AMAN is represented through a local chapter known as AMAN Pus Kona Sapata Vaisapa Lelean. And they have been active since, I believe, the late 90s, as I've been told. And the Mamasa region is home to a community with very strong Ada traditions. So the Mamasa chapter of Aman has worked on primarily territorial mapping. So the legal recognition of ancestral lands and assuring that these are well preserved. Ecological conservation, especially around the Gandang Dewata National Park, which is also part of flows together with the territorial mapping. The preservation of culture and heritage. So this includes documenting rituals and safeguarding the sacred sites. But especially in the recent decade, also youth engagement, particularly promoting the intergenerational transmission of ancestral language and customs. And they try to link this youth engagement to the collaboration with the community elders. So the culture, reshaping their position as cultural authorities in negotiating modernization while maintaining this cultural continuity. So the reason why Aman is needed in a place like Mamasa, and of course I went over this already, is that it does phrase pressing need for development support. The Regency is to this day predominantly agrarian, with most households engaging in small-scale farming. According to many local sources that I've spoken to, unemployment in Mamasa is currently quite high, and many people primarily engage in unpaid work and subsistence farming, which highlights the scarcity of stable formal employment. And for young people in particular, the lack of local prospects often pushes them to migrate to urban centers like Makassar in search for better work. And various development programs, whether government-led or supported by NGOs or IGOs, have brought valuable improvements to education, healthcare, and infrastructure in Mamasa. And I saw this, for example, in a school that I visited that was built with support of the Australian-Indonesia Partnership. But at the same time, I also saw a broken window just outside the schoolyard that, of course, can be very dangerous when a child walks up against it and they might cut themselves, but they currently don't have the funding to fix this. So this window had been broken for, I think, several years. And Aman works to ensure that an ever-changing Muslim society and their culture and ancestral pride will not be lost to development or modernization. So in Mamasa, this means that institutionalizing adat structures, mapping ancestral lands, and creating youth programs that link cultural pride to future opportunities. And in this way, Aman bridges the external influences with culturally grounded local lifeways and knowledge systems. During my time in Mamasa, I collaborated strongly with Aman, especially the chairman of Aman, that I know as Pak Thomas, also colloquially known as Papa Arta. They welcomed me in open arms, and the value they brought to me was very rich. Pak Thomas, who I was very eager to talk to me about the research that I did, and he played a vital role in supporting me during my time in Mamasa. He took me across the region and introduced me to community elders, youth activists. He welcomed me into his home and to his family. And he took me across the region and introduced, and beyond facilitating this access, he became a cultural interpreter and explained the significance of rituals, the challenge of modernization, and how Aman is working to institutionalize other knowledge for future generations. And without his help from him and from other Aman members like Pak David, Pak Rama, it would not have been possible to do this research that I valued so much. So, of course, as my research was, while I was there and given all the support he had given me, I asked Pak Thomas, like, as you've helped me so much, please tell me, what can I do for you? What can I do for Aman? And he told me that they plan on building a school and I can help create funds. And this is an indigenous school that they hope to build, hopefully next year, that teaches traditional knowledge, oral history, crafts, ritual, and ecological practices. This local school, revitalize and strengthen the use of the Mamasa language. It is aimed to empower youth to remain in their communities and take on leadership roles in governance and environmental stewardship. And it's there to serve as a bridge between ancestral wisdom and modern skills, and preparing future generation to navigate both these worlds. By institutionalizing cultural education, the school will become a cornerstone for cultural resilience in Mamasa. It represents the community's determination to ensure that modernization does not mean cultural erosion, but rather cultural renewal. And at the moment, I'm supporting Aman in finalizing their project proposal and in building meaningful partnerships that can help give the initiative stronger legitimacy within the country. So once this proposal is complete, our next steps are to raise the necessary funds to bring this project into reality. So the total estimated costs are roughly 400 million rupiah, so around 20,000 US dollars. And once that's been able to be, once that is established and funded, then they hope to start construction sometime next year. So as this presentation comes to a close, I again want to thank BRIN and especially Bu Sastri and Bu Fakriati for giving me the chance to share my story with you. The story is built on understanding traditions not as static, but rather as constantly negotiated and reshaped, lived in new ways. These changes in Lifeways are often accelerated by new opportunities that allow us to carve out new paths and go into new directions, something one may have hoped for a long time. The challenge and the opportunity is to create that space where this can happen without losing sight of what gives those traditions meaning. And I think that is something that we can all relate to wherever we're from. So that's why I believe that institutions like Aman and this project they're working on, the Sekolah Adat, are worth working towards. And I think whether we're from Mamasa, Jakarta, or the Netherlands, we can reflect on how we can continue to open doors for growth and opportunity systematically, but also sustainably. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johannes. It's very insightful presentation, actually. I myself make a research in indigenous language in Enggano in my early career, so I'm very related to it. But I write down some note that may be important, maybe debatable, but I will keep it in for the last session. And for this session, I invite some a question from the audience here. Feel free to deliver your question in Indonesian language. We have some, we will translate it later. So, any question? From Zoom, also, we also invite the question from Zoom. Is there any question? Okay. BC May.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Yeah, later. Wait 4 minutes because something wrong with this. Okay, we may continue. Thank you, Mr. Hendrik. Excellent presentations about navigating change for the modernization of local Lifeways. Is it new for us? And then last month, I have been in West Sulawesi, in Mandar. But I see Mamasa is in West Sulawesi territory, but very different from Mandar.
Whether I've heard of Manda?
Mandar in Polewali, Majene,
Yeah,
Mamuju, and then we have to go.
I think it's west of Mamasa, isn't it?
For the west to go to find Mamasa, and then it's very near to Toraja in Sulawesi.
Oh, okay, because Mamutri, if I'm not mistaken, is by the coast, isn't it? And Toraja is the other way, so it's towards the east.
Yeah, I mean that for local Lifeways, Mamasa is very different with the most popular custom in West Sulawesi. The most popular custom in West Sulawesi is Mandar, and then it is localized for Mamasa, and Mamasa near from Toraja, and then including the custom is very almost the same with Toraja.
Right, yeah.
Yes, almost the same. Why? Because I see there in Mamasa, most of the people there are Christian, and then in Mandar, fully Muslim. So after you navigate the challenges, navigate the local Lifeways in Mamasa, I'm so sorry before because I come late and I don't see for all of your presentation last there, but I didn't find the examples of the ways of Lifeways. You may mention for us the Lifeways of Mamasa that you have navigate in Mamasa. And then we just see that you have an excellent planning for the next that you have to find or you have to build a custom school for local people there. But the result of your navigation about the Lifeways of Mamasa, you may mention for us. I think that's all. Thank you.
No, please go ahead.
Second question. Okay.
I didn't quite grasp the. You want to explain a little bit more differences between
May I continue the question? Oh, satu aja. Oh ya, siap.
The problem is in the media, as I find in some discussion, maybe someone influence of the region. It's more make the regions evolve than
more eroding than others.
Maybe if you want to bring it up.
Should I answer this question right now?
Yeah, I think Sasri. Okay, please. Johannes, you can answer this directly.
So to answer your question as well as I can, what we often see in anthropology is, of course, in anthropology there's a large balance between zooming in and zooming out. We go into very small and particular segments of the population or very specific cultures. We observe something, and then we write about it, and we kind of see how this human nature is reflected on the broader scale of our thinking and our doing. And what you often end up with in anthropology is that it sometimes tends to raise more questions than it answers, in the fact that it's true that, yes, maybe this one religion has a different impact on how these local customs are preserved than another religion. Or another, yeah, how another religion would do this. Unfortunately, I didn't, of course, my research was very particular about Mamasa, and I do not really know how, and I really focused on this particular Christian community within Mamasa. So I do not really have the knowledge about how this differentiates with Muslim majority regions in other parts of West Sulawesi. But I'm certainly curious to see, it does open a lot of questions into further research. I think there has been very similar research done. I would not be able to, I might be able to talk to you after this and give you exact link, maybe perhaps. But there has been a lot of similar research in other parts of Indonesia as well, which I have studied in preparation of my thesis, that does discuss how maybe certain Islamic parts of Indonesia, how local languages are preserved there. I'm afraid I can't really answer your question too directly, but I think there's certainly information out there about this.
Jadi sebentar Mas. Jadi dia tidak bisa menjawab bagaimana ada perbandingannya dengan Mandar karena dia berfokus pada pengkajian di Mamasa sebenarnya, bahwa dia belum bisa memastikan ada kesamaan struktur budaya antara Mamasa dengan Mandar gitu. Jadi apa itu cukup menjawab?
No.
Yeah.
Simple question. I make it simple that you have navigate the Lifeways in Mamasa. Yeah. So you may mention to us the result of your navigation.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe he want you bring it up.
For example, yeah. For example.
Well, in the title of my research, the navigation doesn't actually refer to me as a navigator, as a researcher. Rather, it refers to how the local communities themselves navigate between modernization and customary traditions. I don't know if that helps you with this question.
Jadi navigasi di sini dia menyerahkan kepada masyarakat lokalnya sendiri. Itu yang dituju, bukan? Atau coba dalam bahasa Indonesia, nanti saya coba terjemah.
But you have didn't found about the one of custom lifestyle of Mamasa people. You didn't get it?
Rambu alu, saya nggak salah.
For example, in Toraja there is Rambu Solo, Rambu Tuka.
Ya, Rambu Solo dia sebut tadi dalam presentasinya. Sepertinya sudah disebutkan.
Is it always the same custom in Mamasa?
Sorry, I grasped your question. So what we see in Mamasa nowadays with the Rambu Solo, it's actually, as you might have seen yourself, I think in Toraja, tourism is still significantly larger than in Mamasa nowadays, because I know from Mamasa that tourism used to be a lot bigger a few decades ago. But it's within Toraja, Mamasa, from what I've been told, the Rambu Solo is also very significant and a very well-known cultural practice that are trying to elevate in sharing stories about their culture and heritage. But in reality, it's true nowadays, Mamasa de Rambu Solo is not something that occurs for most people that are deceased, especially in higher socioeconomic circles. There is a larger resemblance of how the Rambu Solo was practiced a few decades or maybe a century ago. As the body, I have visited a house where the body was preserved for quite a long time, and in these communities, buffaloes and more animal sacrifices are made. But for a lot of people in Mamasa nowadays, especially people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, the funeral ceremonies primarily follow Christian traditions, in the sense that the pastor comes by praise are performed, and they are brought after, the service, which usually takes a couple of days. They are brought to their, familiar family burial ground. But one key aspect of the Ramuso that they do try to integrate as much as possible, but depending on the finances of the family and those around them, animals are still sacrificed. In wealthier families, this can be maybe sometimes, even in relatively wealthy families, sometimes a buffalo is, as you know, very expensive amasa. So you gotta come from a very particular household for you to actually have a buffalo sacrifice at your funeral. But usually a few pigs and some chickens are very customary in smaller circles. It's less than that, but I hope that kind of answers your question.
Ya, cukup ya. Oke.
Explanation for the custom local custom of Mamasa.
It's okay.
Okay.
Let's move to the next question. Okay.
Later we will discuss.
Please.
Thank you, moderator, and okay, Mr. Hendrik. The question that I want to ask that is, it is very interesting to study the Mamasa culture amid the battle of the influence of customary traditions, Christianity, and modernization. In this case, I would like to direct on the application of your theory to explain. How do you apply Bourdieu's theory to explain the struggle between the arena of tradition, the arena of religion, and the arena of modernizations in shaping the social practices of the Mamasa community in your research? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I do understand that it's especially comparing things that are so different in nature. It's my hard to grasp the pattern between them, and I fully understand that. But let's put it this way: I'm from the Netherlands. And when I was talking to people in Mamasa, a lot of people asked me, what is your ancestral religion? And in the Netherlands or in Europe, we don't really have an ancestral religion because we've had the larger base of the population has been Christian for over 1,000 years. Where in Mamasa, Christianity is truly referred to as the modern religion, something that has been around for roughly 100 years now, and that's the early stage of Christianity. And it wasn't really. It has been a long process that really came into, it was really only really similar to what it is now 70 years ago. So for me, Christianity is not really something that I can compare to, let's say, modern technology nowadays. It's really something that I wanted to use or apply to find a more comparison in time. So if you think at how modern technology is changing Mamasa society now in the 21st century, can you compare that to how Christianity might have made some change in how people responded to that 80 years ago? Because even though religion, of course, is very cosmological and spiritual, it's also about the institutional changes that it brought. The church was it was a very well-established institution that brought changes in terms of education. It brought changes that missionaries came with healthcare and with all different kind of aspects, things that were very much organized by a Luke before. So maybe it's not even really emphasizing the spiritual component of the religion, but more the institutional and organizational component of these religions, and how that perhaps between these different parts of time in recent history and now compares to the way people engage with their cultures. Now with modern technology, now people have phones and use social media and might not engage with these practices the same way. I hope that sort of answers your question.
Well, I also have a same question, actually, but I think we looking for, what we're looking for is the strategy, the real strategy to solve the real problem. In this case, she talking about a tradition, Mamasa tradition as arena. So how you operate the Bourdieu theory, siapa tuh ya? To the Foucault theory in this way to solve the real problem with the real strategy. I think it's the aim of this
Okay.
question.
So the difficult thing about, of course, that when I say use the word culture, culture is a very broad, ambiguous container term. You know, I think when I use it as something that we can roughly, especially when you talk about culture more broadly, it's very valuable and something you can use. But of course, it's a container term. Because it can refer to linguistics. It can refer to particular ways we greet each other, the roles in society we have for men. It of course very broad. So before you can even start to, you know, get into, you know, answering such a question, you got to really make, okay, before let's see what exactly are we trying to preserve? What exactly is this? Now, something that I really enjoy learning more about, and something that I think is also very well representative of how it at least is approached is language. Because language and the way languages are preserved often reflect the way we identify with a given society as a unique identity apart from maybe a greater national identity. It says something about how much of the localized life is still alive, so to speak. So, you know, there are certain things that are really hard to preserve. For example, like a Rambu solo is very expensive, like we talked about earlier. So, you know, it's not, you cannot really expect to, you know, create giant economic growth, particularly for such a ceremony. But what, for example, can happen is for example, this initiative Aman has for the indigenous schools. What the indigenous school really focuses on is a couple of components, and these are customary leadership, particular dances and ways of, I think, I can't really think of the word right now, but the way people knit, I think you know what I mean with the, I'll get back to that, but of course, language, the customary leadership, traditional dances, and also, like I said, and the way certain, there's in Mamasa, there's a particular way people, for example, use backstrap looms to weave sarongs, right? So the way people, for example, weave. There are very particular things that people, very practical things that are easily preservable for relatively few that require like few funds, but they really do have an impact on how people engage with their own environments.
Udah bisa dimengerti.
Okay, thank you. Maybe later, I hope any discussions move to the further discussion. Maybe you can say, and you add some points about Bourdieu's theories clearly, because it is a very important point in this research. You have to see this problem through the Bourdieu's, and you see what is symbolic capital and also the model capital, and find it will influence for the practice in the society. Maybe you can start from each of Bourdieu's theory until you can find the final of the your research. Maybe I just give some I would say additions for this research.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. We also invite the question from the attendant participant from webinar from Zoom. Is there any question? You can raise your hand if you have a question. Oh, there's a question in chat. Okay, I will read the question from you from Zoom. I really appreciate this research from Mr. Johannes, not Mr. Eric, it's Mr. Johannes, okay. It's very interested in Sekolah Adat. What is the criteria for this school? Who is the objective of this program? maybe the ASN is a governmental employee in Mamasa, or it is need in a part of regulation like Perda, like in the Bali, they took the tradition as a regular in Perda. Is that a clear question for you?
Yes. It's a very good question. So of course the school the indigenous the school that is the Sekolah Adat is a project that is run by the local chapter of Aman. So there are several components that go into this and several partners that can be found. I think currently there's a local agency in South Sulawesi that is that we're trying to establish contact with to establish more legitimacy. I think the overcoupling, like the larger organization from Mon nationally, might be involved, but I'm not too familiar with Indonesian governance to really know which agencies can be addressed where. But that is something that we're currently working on. Luckily, I'm being supported by a lot of people. Like Aman is being supported by a lot of different people that have a lot more knowledge about this. That know that are looking into this. Yes.
I think it's answered the question. So, well, is there any question left? We invite you. Pak Didi, do you have any question? Okay, please, Pak Didi.
Thank you for the opportunity, and actually, thank you so much for Johan. This is a very great contribution to Indonesian culture and the people of Mamasa. Very happy to learn from your research. I have only one question, and then maybe not question, but maybe more proposal.
Sure.
The question is about Catherine. It's very interesting how she speaks English, because then if local children know, maybe it can inspire the other children to learn Mamasa language, Bahasa Indonesia, and even English, because often it is only in the mind. So maybe you can explain about that. And the second thing, it's very commendable about the sekolah adat. Yeah. In some other places like Central Sulawesi, it has worked, so it can also work here. I wonder if you can also involve the local government. I mean, you are talking about institutionalization, but this is beyond, maybe it is institutional, but it is also policy, because the district education office, they have space for what is called muatan lokal. Muatan lokal is local content. And you can, being the hero that you are, maybe you can go to the local education office and make a presentation like this to encourage them to support the Aman Adat school, so that it will not be only Aman initiative, but also
Bahasa, Badan Bahasa.
yeah,
Also Badan Bahasa.
also Badan, yeah, Bu Sasri. So your study can go a long way. Badan Bahasa and local, I mean the district government, even this can also help their key performance indicators. So you wouldn't know unless you talk to them. And when you go, it is best if you go with local people like Pak Thomas and the elders,
Pak David, maybe.
Pak David, you mean? Pak Rama?
Pak Rama, yeah.
Oh, Pak Rama.
He's
Yeah,
the current project manager of the indigenous school.
yeah. And Pak David is former director of district education office. So they will probably listen more if you come.
Certainly.
Yeah.
But David also carries a lot of social credibility. Because I think during my time at Mamasa, Pak David actually hosted an event for the new regent of Mamasa. So that's also very helpful. No, that's certainly very interesting. Thank you very much, Didi.
Thank you.
Okay, another question. Oh, Bayu, silakan.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that's the interesting thing because even though we're here talking about like preserving local languages primarily, it's what really motivated me to talk about this also because I think it is really great that this girl and let's call her Catherine, of course, for this instance, did speak English very well, and I think that is also it's incredibly valuable because if I wasn't able to speak English, it wouldn't be possible for me to talk to you right now. So it is definitely, especially in more global environments, a very key skill to have. But you also see when you see that particularly someone who speaks English very well struggles with the local language, then you see that there's an issue there's an issue there where you might see a pattern where okay, so you do speak English, but you can also speak English and speak the local language. So how do you create an environment in which those are both sustainable? And I think, yeah, I mean, I can't speak for this little girl, but I certainly agree that, if this occurrence would inspire other students there, then yeah, that would be, I don't know, really exactly know what the particular question is that you wanted to know, but I hope this brief discussion answered the information that you were. Yeah, provide the information you were looking for. Yes. He's nodding yes, so I think it's okay.
Okay, yes for the questions. So we move to the next question. But I see you raise your hand, please.
Hello.
Hello.
So thank you. First of all, thank you for the presentation. And second of all, you have the same name with my brother, little brother, Johannes.
Oh, that's
So
great.
hey, brother, nice to meet you.
Hello.
Okay. I have two questions actually, but I want to start with the more personal question related with why did you only spend 10 weeks in Mamasa? What kind of challenge? Is it because of the funding or maybe the time constraint from your university because actually it is your master project or any other challenges? Because I need you to answer this first because it leads to the second question. Thank you.
It was actually a lot of my fellow students also chose to do research in the Netherlands. And of course, doing research in our home country is relatively easy to organize. But coming to Indonesia was and developing this was actually quite a challenge. And more or less, I wasn't to really, I actually planned on coming a few weeks earlier than I had expected to, and ended up arriving. In my master's program, we are expected to do 10 to 12 weeks of research. And of course, I did want to grasp it as fully as possible, 12 weeks would have been ideal. But there were some problems with, for example, organizing research permits and actually to make sure that the visa exactly. So to really make sure that the research I conducted was supported by Indonesian government institutions. We ended up developing a plan that resulted in this research only spanning 10 weeks, with a few with some time off in the middle. But luckily, I think for the particular, it was a relatively small project compared to, of course, other research projects. But for the particular purpose I was looking for, I feel like I did luckily end up with a well-rounded information I was looking for. So that's, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Nah, because usually for the anthropological study, you should, well, my friends, anthropologist friends, said that it's minimum 6 months until 1 year to get the full and complete information and context, especially for a community that you have been working with before. But yeah, I understand your difficulties and challenges as a foreigner, of course.
Well,
yeah.
I won't deny that the research I performed cannot be compared to a full rounded 6-month research. A lot of anthropologists, trained anthropologists, PhD graduates, they do, even for PhD research, they often enter a field for a full year. And especially when you're there for that long, the research you do then my research cannot be nearly compared to, of course, what these people perform, because that really also allows you to grasp the full language. It allows you to really live with the community far more intensively than I did. I think at the end of the day, even if I stayed for a year, my positionality would still cause some constraints to the fact that it is really hard to, I would never do, I think simply due to the fact that I was a foreigner, really integrating into the community to an extent where I was seen as really part of the community would have been quite a challenge in any respect. But yeah, no, I know, I definitely know what you're referring to. So I certainly do not aim to, I don't expect the same credibility as your anthropology friends.
Okay, so yeah, the next question is related. Okay, so you mentioned that the young generation lose the tradition from the ancestors, right?
Right.
Okay, so I wanna discuss a little bit about this because there is another theory on mnemonic device. Yeah.
Okay.
Mnemonic device. I got it from a professor in Australia, in Melbourne. So you mentioned Maori people in your presentation. And then the neighbor of Maori people is the indigenous people from Australia.
The Aboriginals.
Yeah,
right.
the Aboriginal and the Torres Strait Islander people. And then a lot of those indigenous peoples become a professor. And then one of them introduced the theory on mnemonic device. And then it says that our ancestors are very practical people. So they kept their memory in song, chants, acronyms, dance, etc. So I think not all the traditions of Mamasa people will lose, but because they still have this mnemonic device, I don't know, maybe if you stay longer or if you can continue this project into your PhD, you can find this thing, this mnemonic device. So it can reduce or minimize the gap or the bias between your finding now and then another theory that I think more relevant because the theory comes from the indigenous people as well, not from the white majority people like Bourdieu and then Foucault, something like that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
I think you make a very, very valid point there. Because, especially, I think, and I think you really, in Europe, unfortunately, I think, even in anthropology, and it's actually a bit ironic, that even, you really try to integrate into society, but at the end of the day, the research that you're engaging with is very Eurocentric in the sense that you're engaging with European scholars. Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'll certainly look into that. I think, I think what I found, it's also about, even though, you know, like there's the preservation of these cultures by these people themselves, but it's also about, I think, apart from whether you're indigenous or whether you're from a more larger city or another country, globalization and influence of social media has a huge effect on how the way we communicate with the outside world. And I think, and this is something that spans across cultures, is that when your own environment is poorly institutionalized and especially vulnerable and get, and consists of a smaller number of people, then it does require some different reflections, especially. So I think it definitely certainly helped me recognize the reflections that are needed and the things to look at, how to look at it, and actually how to approach it. I think there's certainly, like you said, some mnemonic devices and indigenous scholars can really contribute to what does it actually mean and where do you actually go from there. But that's a very, very valuable insights, and I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mas Ferdi.
Okay, yes, answer the question. So, Bu Sasti have a question, please?
Ya, sorry, saya berbahasa Indonesia karena lebih merespon kepada Ayu. Sebetulnya mnemonic device itu suatu konsep dari kajian tradisi lisan dan itu juga dari Barat, Ayu, dari Lord, dan sebelum Lord mungkin ada satu lagi pemikir filsuf dari kajian klasik Eropa, tetapi itu memang banyak kita bisa temukan di masyarakat yang masih kuat orientasi lisannya seperti di Mamasa. Tapi kalau itu tidak ada transformasi, mnemonic device atau alat pengingat yang ada di masyarakat lisan itu juga tidak berjalan. Jadi mungkin salah satu dari yang ditawarkan oleh orang Mamasa sendiri yang punya kesadaran untuk membuat sekolah adat dan lalu di backup oleh Johannes dengan pendanaan, itu suatu kemajuan ya, satu kolaborasi yang baik menurut saya. Yang jadi masalah yang selalu kita ratapi dalam masyarakat yang berorientasi lisan itu putusnya transformasi, dan itu yang banyak terjadi di Indonesia menurut saya. Itu saja sih, Freddy. Terima kasih.
Is there any question left? If permitted, actually, I have my own question. Can I ask it, the question?
Pada Johannes,
Okay, please.
do you have plan to come back to Mamasa? Because when you told us about your language, local language, how you can conclude all the research and all the data from the local people for your thesis, because I think you have problem with the local language, and we hope you will come back to Mamasa and get more deep information from the local people.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you in that sense. So what you also see is the fact that, and this is actually apart from my research in particular, but what you also see is when Bahasa is not as strongly institutionalized or documented, of course, Bahasa Indonesia. So while I was there, I had a lot of opportunities and different methods I could use, whether it's through reading or certain, translation applications, but also applications you use to study languages to improve my Bahasa Indonesia. Studying Bahasa Mamasa proved to be quite difficult, and there's an old-fashioned method, of course, that you use prior to these modern technological developments, by just engaging with the people, pointing at things. Okay, what's this? What is that? And that brought me to learn a few words and phrases. But yeah, I do agree that, once you're actually in Masa for a longer period of time, then you do spend more time with people in a setting, then you can that would actually allow me to do a little bit more there. Of course, also due to my own visa and legal limitations, there's only so much I can do in Indonesia. And of course, in research and support with the Mamasa people. I do have some vague plans on visiting Mamasa in the near future, but that would primarily be for leisure and to revisit some dear the friends and the people I've worked together with, and to see how they're doing, but also of course to discuss this project and see how we can move forward from there, because of course the one-on-one contact would allow me to do this maybe perhaps a bit better than from a distance.
Question. Okay. Let's create.
Thank you.
Let's
This is
discussion.
very, very brief, supporting what Ibu Sastri said. I think it's excellent idea to go back and return the knowledge. It is not only ethical that researchers come back, but also, of course, it helped the local communities. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I didn't fully, sorry, I didn't quite, but yeah, I will certainly go back to Mamasa to return the knowledge. Sorry, I didn't quite grasp the particular aspect of your statement, but no, I certainly, yeah, I certainly will do that, of course, yes.
Any question left? No? We still have 70 minutes to 11 o'clock, and I will deliver my question. Is okay?
Yeah, certainly.
Oh, okay. I make some note with your with your presentation. So the note is I will read it for you. I will read it for you. The young generation shift from moral custom to institutional logic.
Yes.
And they make a some preservation by myself, their self-preservation through digital form. But this is fragmentary without deeper connection to context. And the risk is tradition become an artificial exhibition. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's deeper. Like I said before, I make the same encourage research in my early career, and it's a deeper conclusion that you reach in your research. I want to you elaborate more how you can reach this conclusion.
I think you make a very valid point to this in the sense that, you know, the motivation behind documenting such traditions is much deeper than merely performing traditions. I think it primarily comes down to the idea that while you do see an increase in documenting tradition through social media, you know, there's still simultaneously a lack of discussions about discussions about the lack of intergenerational transmission, and especially in the case of Mamasa, intergenerational transmission itself is very key to the preservation of that culture, because the intergenerational transmission is very integral to that culture itself. So in this particular case, the way that it's preserved is very how do you phrase this? Of course, given the fact that the way culture is preserved and the methods that are traditionally applied are so key to the culture itself, it kind of creates a different perspective to youth engagement with it through social media. Because even though this is still very important, and it's not that this shouldn't be, it's more that it should certainly be accompanied by something else in order to really maintain you know, the local Lifeways as they have been brought to them.
Can we say, in other words, the old-fashioned way that we do, the old-fashioned method is more effective than digital method?
It also that kind of depends on effective for what. I think Aman in Mamas also has a youth chapter. Pak Rama would
I mean, in this context, for institutionalize the
institutionalization.
yeah.
In the case of institutionalization, I would say it's really about combining these methods that eventually will bring it into fruition, in the sense that the digital technology that especially youth Mamasa are very experienced with and know very well is something that especially the youth chapter of Mamasa is very focusing on. Mamasa in Aman. In Mamasa, Aman also has a youth chapter that is led by Bakarama. He's an associate of Aman that's, I think, in his early 30s, maybe late 20s. And given that their generational expertise in handling modern technology, they are trying to make sure that the Mamasa language is saved in some kind of coding digital database that is coded and saved. They're trying to also share a lot of it on social media. It is just that, of course, when you perform a certain, I'm sure that you agree that when you perform certain dances just for social media, it's not quite the same as performing them in your setting and really doing it for yourself. I think it also reflects our own human experience that sometimes when I visit an area and I take a picture of something, it might help me remember what I'm seeing, but it also kind of takes me out of the moment. And I think that is a risk of social media and modern technology that, you know, spans cultures. Because if you really want to be in the moment and enjoy seeing something, then you also have to put your phone away and do it for yourself and do it for just your own eyes. And I think that's really when the influence from traditional elders and their role in preserving languages and transmitting it to the younger generation is key to upholding that.
Thank you. Very instructive explanation. So, if there's no any question left, I think I will close this. I'm sorry, a public lecture. Okay, provide some suggestion. Well, yeah. Well, I think I will give you some conclusion that I made. In deeper context, pergeseran bahasa, language shift is related to power structure. What we can get it from Johannes' presentation, and sometimes a younger generation is shift from moral customary ethic to the institutional logic. Is the main problem of the language shift. So, if you want to preserve the language, you have to institutionalize it in the community. So the collaboration, like with Aman, is a strategy that we can use. Balai bahasa, kurang balai bahasa. Is a once a sample strategy that that can be a problem solving for it. Is it? I hope I not make a mistake for this conclusion. It's okay. So can we close this public lecture? Okay. I think all very much for patience. Thank you for a constructive discussion. Maybe you have a word, a last word. A couple.
Just I wanted to thank you all for opening me and welcoming me at the BRIN here at the BRIN Research Center. I've you know in university I've learned that passion is something that you can't find. It's something that you develop, and over the course of time, this subject is something that I've grown to be very passionate about. Indonesia, and especially Mamasa, but actually Indonesia as a country, is something that has really grasped and taken a place in my heart, and I feel a lot of I'm very appreciative of my opportunity to share this in such a beautiful building with such just wonderful people. So thank you very much, and We'll talk again.
Okay, please applause, Bros. Johannes. Okay, with the last word, I think we can close this public lecture. Thank you very much for your participation, for mindful discussion, and maybe we can open the change to collaboration. I close this webinar. I think they're all. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and see you all. See you later.
Of course. Yeah. It's actually a lot of expected from the now. Very small amount. But it does, it was formed as a confederation of different regions that all kind of spoke their own language. And really, many people you Indonesia call as you. That's true. I think you're actually a bit taller, actually. Oh yeah. But yeah, it's, they're very closely related, but it is that.
Yang lain masuk aja, yang magang kasih satu yang moto.
Yeah.
Sorry. Jahuri, kabir. Dalam
Ke atas saja Pak. Pak Mul naik, Pak Mul.
naik.
It kind of unfolded that way because everything that I've done in Mamasa has been possible by Pagi, by Dr. And she actually proposed, I shared my interest and my passion with him. We discussed it at length, and then he said, I think Mamasa would be a very good place to begin with it. And everything I've done is thanks to him. So that's